Centre for Inquiry, Canada's premier venue for secular humanists, atheists, skeptics, and free thinkers.
So I would like at this point to introduce our first panel, which is on the topic of art, prehistory, and evolution. And to do the formal introduction, I'm going to call up the chair of this panel, Dr. Chris DiCarlo. Let me just read Chris's bio before we move on to have him up on the podium. Dr. DiCarlo is Ontario's Best Lecturer of 2008 and Canada's Humanist of the Year of 2008. Big year for Chris. He's a philosopher of science and ethics whose interests in cognitive evolution have taken him into the natural and social sciences. His personal research focuses on how and why humans reason, think, and act the way they do. Dr. DiCarlo is currently an assistant professor at the University of Ontario Institute of Technology, where he teaches critical thinking, bioethics, and other courses. He's an advisor to CFI and a perfect person to open today's conference. Chris.
Thank you, Justin. Good morning, everyone. Our first speaker today is a gentleman by the name of Dr. James Harrod. And if you can see his bio in our outline here, it says that James researches and writes on the origins of art, religion, and language over the last 3 million years of human evolution. That's a fair chunk of time. James did field school in paleoanthropology at Kubi Fora in Kenya. He's participated in rock art expeditions to central India, the Negev Desert in Israel, and the outback of Australia. He has an article in Press on chimpanzee spirituality and another interpreting the Upper Paleolithic female figurine, which I'm very much interested in myself. And after James's presentation today, what we're going to do is we're going to have a bit of a Q&A between the two of us, kind of an interaction. And then the audience, of course, you're certainly welcome to ask questions as well, and there will be basically an interaction that way. Hank Davis will not be presenting his talk today, so it'll be basically James is the headliner. So, James also teaches shamanic trance postures and is a practitioner of Tibetan Buddhist meditation, and I understand you also have a PhD in religion, which will add to the flair of your personality today. So, without further ado, let me introduce Dr. James Harrod.
Thank you, Chris. And can everyone hear me okay? I have a very soft voice when I'm talking usually, so. I should add at least one more credential since I'm with a group of secular humanists. In around 1980, when I got my first job out of university, graduate school, I was a humanist in residence at the Department of Mental Health, Mental Retardations, and Corrections for the state of Maine, a philosopher in residence. At that time, the National Endowment for the Humanities in the U.S. had a program which they called Humanities and Public Policy. And it was created under Jimmy Carter's administration. And it was a wonderful branch of the National Endowment. And it was to take the humanities and inquiry into every neighborhood in the country. And it was very successful. And I was one of 2 philosophers in residence in the country, and my program was ranked as one of the outstanding programs for the National Endowment for the Humanities that year. It was a 1.5-year grant, and I worked primarily on family policy issues, but also we had philosophers' lunches with the heads of the bureaucracy, and tried to get them to open their minds to in general. So I have a great sympathy for secular humanism. The Department of Education for the state wanted to take me on an additional grant, but the resistance against secular humanists was so strong at the time in the state of Maine that they didn't want to put any red flags up in the state agency for public education, so that didn't happen. But that's just, so I worked for 20 years as a policy analyst for the Department of Mental Health on mental health services. But in the meantime, I've kept all my research going on the side every weekend and every night practically all these years. And what I'm going to talk about today is this 3 million years of evolution of art, religion, and symbolism. I want to thank Justin and the Center for this invitation, because I'm a great procrastinator, so it gave me a deadline to produce, and so I come up with new ideas which I've never presented before, so I'll see how they'll go. And this will, I warn you, this is going to be a fairly intense presentation. I'm not going to cover the full 3 million years, but I will work primarily on the Oldowan period, which is from about 3 million to 1.5 million years ago. And so I have to see how we're doing with I get these. I have to work this technology here somehow.
It is loading 300 million years worth of data, so what do you expect?
It's 18 megabytes, of which will hopefully will cover about 5 megabytes. That's good. So basically today I want to talk about I want to describe a major paradigm shift that's emerging in our knowledge and understanding of human cultural evolution. This paradigm suggests that art, religion, language, symbol have been evolving for at least 2 million years. The old model posits that these cultural forms arose some 50,000 years ago in some sort of Eurocentric creative explosion, as they call it. This position is no longer tenable. Art, religion, language, and symbol go back at least 2 million years. International research on rock art and paleosymbolism is providing an ever-expanding database for reconceptualizing the cultural capacity of Middle Paleolithic, Early Paleolithic, and Oldowan period hominids. And a whole new subdiscipline of research is emerging. And so to repeat, for 2 million years, the evolution of art occurs in tandem with the evolution of religion, symbol, language, and other knowledge encoding systems. So I only have, say, 40 minutes to present. We'd need at least a semester to do the entire presentation. Basically, I want to say there are 4 major symbolic systems, one for each of these 4 eras of human evolution. And I will be addressing just this earliest of the 4 time periods. So you'll just get a taste of this research I'm working on. Each time period has a major conceptual, symbolic meme, I guess you could call it. I understand maybe Dawkins was here last year or 2 years ago and talked about memes, or he was in Toronto. So I picked up his term memes, and so as a kind of shorthand for what I'm talking about. So each of the 4 major eras of human evolution has its unique meme. And I didn't quite understand this until I started preparing for this presentation, but I got a somewhat clearer picture now of what these might be. So the conference theme today is art and science. And so it seems apropos to begin with a quote from one of the founders of quantum physics, Niels Bohr. And well, I'll just go back before I get to him. This is me. I have a nonprofit center for research on the origins of art and religion, and that's the website, origensnet.org. So just about everything I'm talking about, you can find hundreds, probably 400 or 500 images now that are on OrigensNet. It's an international association of primarily amateur researchers, collectors of this early rock art, none of which is accepted by the establishment, basically. So we're right on the edge, and I've been at this for 25 years, and I see that their side of the edge is getting closer and closer. So it's only a matter of time before this art gets more accepted. So art and science. So this is Niels Bohr, and a statement whose opposite is false is trivial. A statement whose opposite is also true is profound. The word profound disappeared. That's how deep it is. It's profound. And that's Niels Bohr's crest, coat of arms which he created for himself, and you see the Chinese Taoist symbol in the center with the opposites, and he has inscribed on his crest, contraria sunt complementa. The opposites are complementary. So here I'm using this because the way I see this is Niels Bohr is suggesting we not hold to a simplistic, logical view of scientific theory and practice. He's also saying something about the ambiguity of the term science and the limits of human cognition. A statement whose opposite is also true is profound. In the context of my hypotheses, I take Bohr's quote as referring to an inherent characteristic of the symbolic. With respect to cultural evolution, I'll be talking about this. Contraria sunt complementa. Given the profundity of our subject, I'll begin with a cartoon. Since the screen is so close, I can't read it. Oh, I can read it over here. Maybe someday we could set aside or carve just for art. This is a reminder. This cartoon is a reminder that, strictly speaking, the terms such as art, as distinct from something else, say science or technology or religion, is not applicable to these early periods of our evolution. The term art is not even applicable to most currently produced indigenous hunter-gatherer art. These groups like the Inuit have no term for art. They have no term for decoration as opposed to art, or there's just no terms for this. It's all the same. This is my favorite New Yorker cartoonist, David Cypress. So this is a reminder. Did God invent religion, or did religion invent God? This is a reminder that the same goes for the terms religion and spirituality. They're not applicable in the time period we're talking about. And the same goes for the word technology, especially if we think of that term as opposed to art. We must begin with the assumption that people didn't make these distinctions 100,000 or 1,000,000 years ago. And if I use the terms, I will be using them not strictly speaking, but only loosely. And really, we need to make every possible effort to find a new terminology in order to understand the paleoanthropological evidence from these earlier times. So very quickly, to get ourselves oriented, these are the ages I'm talking about. And this image from the National Geographic in 1988, it doesn't have the Oldowan period on it, but that's the small arrow at the bottom on the right for Homo habilis. So we're talking about 4 stages, from Homo habilis, or sometimes Homo rudolfensis, from Lake Rudolph or Lake Turkana, where Kubifora is. So that's the first evolutionary hominid stage there. And then, so from Homo habilis, that's the Oldowan period. Then we go to Homo erectus, which is it's hard to, there's no term in paleoanthropology for this period at this time. So I call it the Acheulean period, but there are many other cultures in this time period of Homo erectus, as well as just the Acheulean, one regional tool technology. And following Homo erectus and the Acheulean period, sometimes I call it the early Paleolithic, we come to the middle Paleolithic, and that is archaic Homo sapiens, and then we come to us, Homo sapiens sapiens, in the archaic, Homo sapiens sapiens is evolving gradually out of the archaic Homo sapiens. So middle Paleolithic is carried by Homo sapiens sapiens and intermixed with this more archaic forms. And then the later Paleolithic, which we can think of as the so-called, they call the creative explosion, which you find in any textbook. This later Paleolithic of also Homo sapiens sapiens. Since I'm comparing the new paradigm, a new paradigm of thinking to an old one, and we're comparing a new paradigm to the old paradigm. This is the old paradigm, so-called creative explosion, or the Big Bang. And you can, for the last 30 or 40 years, all the textbooks dealing with evolution and origins of art and so forth are ensconced in that old model. And it's called now it's called a recent out of Africa, or ROM, the recent out of Africa model, Rome, sort of like read-only memory or something. The recent out of Africa model, and if you go to Wikipedia and look up recent out of Africa model or Rome, they have a very detailed description, and it's quite a good one. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about this, but in the handout I give you the basic list of the paleoanthropological criteria for this for this now outdated theory. 7 categories of evidence. These are each one is the linchpins of this old model, and basically each one's been refuted in one way or another. And so to mix metaphors, I say the Rome model is now like a scarecrow or a straw man with more holes than Swiss cheese. And I actually posted a couple weeks ago an article which recently got rejected from a journal called "Knocking Down the Straw Man Once Again." I give a quick summary of the recent out of Africa model and show its inconsistencies and what the new model is that is the emerging paradigm, which I'll be talking about. Basically, this old paradigm puts the date of, it's basically Homo sapiens sapiens came out of Africa they started out about 40,000 years ago. Then as the data kept refuting them, they kept moving it back. So it went to, and it's hard to get, I can't get anything published because this is still the dominant model. So, but the dates moved back. So with like 2 years ago, I have their Field, Petraglia, and Lahr, who are outstanding archaeologists. And they managed to move the date back to 59,000 to 74,000 years ago. But like I say, everything's beginning 2.5 million years ago at least. So that's a quick summary of the refuted model, which I'm not going to talk about anymore. But if you have any questions about it, you feel free to ask me. Nothing meshes with it. Behaviors which they call modern, which I don't know what the hell that means. Like we're postmodern now, and even now I read we're postmodern. So they're talking about modern behavior back there. And anyway, that shows you how no disciplines cross. No one in anthropology or archaeology knows about postmodernism, except for a few people that are writing in that field. But back in the time periods I'm working on, they like to talk about what's modern behavior, not modern. So the behaviors that go back earlier, the technology that they're talking about is later Paleolithic, it probably arises everywhere in the world at the same time, so it's not any kind of migration out of Africa. They talk about FOXP2 language gene, and that data is really suspect. I'll be talking about symbolic behavior from 2 million years ago. The genetics molecular clock, as we know, is very unreliable. So all the coalescence dates for when things happen are all too low, in my opinion. And I can talk more about that. And anyway, and then they have the paleontological, the replacement theory. People came out of Africa, they knocked off all those Neanderthals and all of that, and that theory is it's not supported anymore. And no one really knows what the connection was, and it's probably like the Anglo invasions of the New World, where viruses and smallpox and things like that led to Neanderthal decline. So anyway, I don't want to criticize those old theories too much. It's a waste of time. So here's a snapshot of the new paradigm. Well, this machine's not bringing up the images in the same way, so I'll bring them all up at the same time. Okay, wave 1 is the dispersal of Homo habilis or Homo rudolfensis. They're two interrelated species. Dispersal out of Africa, carrying the classic Oldowan pebble core tool traditions. About 2 million years ago, the earliest sites in Africa, arriving in East Asia, China, by 1.7 million years ago. The top two images are from Olduvai Gorge and Kubifora, and I'll be talking more about those. So that's the earliest ardent symbol. Wave 2 is the dispersal of Homo erectus out with a what's called Middle Acheulean or a developed Oldowan-like tool tradition out of Africa 1 million years ago, and arriving in East Asia and Southeast Asia by 800,000 years ago. 800,000 years ago, Homo erectus had seafaring abilities and sailed to at least to the island of Flores at 800,000 years ago. And so people were much more competent than we give them credit for, usually. Wave 3 is Homo sapiens sapiens out of Africa or out of Southwest Asia, carrying a mid-middle Paleolithic tool and art kit about 150,000 years ago. This is so-called out of Africa, and in the framework that is emerging now, about 150,000 years ago, or 125,000 in that time period, from either Africa or Southwest Asia. We're not sure which. Based on the archaeology, you can't tell which. And arriving in, say, in Australia by 60,000 years ago. And it's this wave 3, the middle Paleolithic wave 3, that results in giving us a global rock art heritage. these are examples of rock art from all the continents of the world that survive to the present day. To really teach, study, and learn the evolution of art, courses at least need to begin with this global, worldwide evidence of pictograph, petroglyph, and other marking traditions. It occurs across every continent and region of the world: Africa, Southwest Asia, India, Australia, China, Europe, Siberia, North and South America. Each of these lands has an extensive heritage of this global rock art tradition. So every country in the world has a rock art organization, all tied together by the International Federation of Rock Art Organizations, IFRAO. And so just knowing this tradition means that this global rock art tradition began at least 60,000 years ago, because otherwise it wouldn't be in Australia, which opened 60,000 years ago. And so this is a global heritage of the human species for art. So this is the culmination then of this 2 million year tradition of art making, of technology, of symbolism. The 4 eras are in the handout, one of the handouts of the new paradigm. On that page, which should probably be the 3rd page of the handout from the title page, I listed out the 4 eras of evolution, and in column 1 lists the time periods and the subdivisions of the time periods. I usually like to do it early, middle, and late for each one, and pretty much archaeology does that. Column 2 gives the hominin associated with each era. Column 3 is what I call the cognitive style for each of these periods. And basically I took Merlin Donald's his book Origins of the Modern Mind, which is a totally great book. I took his, but it doesn't match up with the archaeology very well. So I took his eras and disassembled and reassembled his model, and his initial model, which was important because it gave everyone a kind of framework to begin thinking about this. And so I made it more in accord with the evidence, and that's what's in my handout. In column 4, I present my hypotheses for the major themes of paleo-symbolism for each era, and you might call them the 4 great memes of civilization. I just make 2 little, I have in cognitive styles, I wanted to begin on the top of that column with what's called rudimentary symbolic cognition, which I discovered by Anne Rousson, who's at York University, has some very excellent research on great ape cognition, and upgraded the status of great ape cognition for everybody, and as a specialist on orangutans as well. And I've just discovered her work about 3 or 4 weeks ago, so I built it into this slide here because it helps support what I'm doing, because I can't be talking about all these cognitive activities of our early hominids without having a clear that we have a better understanding of just how bright our great ape cousins and siblings and ancestors are. So the cognitive style for the older one, it needs a name. I just happen to call it conceptual meaning modeling. And then the Acheulean they have very abstract, complex idea modeling based on pairings of the tools. And then when we're in the Middle Paleolithic, already we have a mythic. That's the first mythic stage, so it's a good 150,000 years earlier than any textbook will tell you, or even the dating that's in Merlin Donald's book. So very briefly there, in what I call Mythic 1 and 2, there's a book in press, which is not out yet. It's probably been in press for several years, by Michael Witzel, who's a South Asia Studies professor at Harvard. And it's going to lay out what he calls the 3 strata of mythology. So the way I learn mythology, it's just global. But really, now in evolution, there are 3 stages to it. So stage 1 and 2, which he calls the Gondwana and Gaia. These are the Middle Paleolithic out of Africa, the Middle Paleolithic dispersal out of Africa. They're already mythological 150,000 years ago. They're carrying what would be like the Khoisan Kung mythology is the earliest, and then on the southern route to Australia, and which they refer to in archaeology, the southern route or paleoanthropology, that's a Gondwana mythology, which you find in Australian mythology, Australian religion and rock art. And then we get shamanism coming in with the later Paleolithic. So anyway, this is a real fast run through, and thanks to the internet, you can go to our center's website and see hundreds of more images of this art and track each of these 4 great eras in much greater detail. So I'm going to sketch out the first of these stages. What I want to focus on is the metaphoric or meta-constellations of paleo-symbolism. Sometimes I think they should be called transforms. We can speculate that on whether there are actual content. Well, when Dawkins talked about memes, the memes had no content. So you can read all kinds of research literature in the field, academic studies on memes, and it's talked about in evolutionary psychology and all that, but when I read it, I can't figure out what they don't say what the memes are. So if we want to use the term memes, maybe we could use it in the sense of there are these constellations, which each one is a transformation. And it's like transformations in physics. It's each one, or mathematics. Each one's a transformation, but these are symbolic. And each one represents a movement and a translation from one form or shape or complexity to another form or shape complexity. And as I suggested with the cartoons, we can't say these are religious or that they're art or that they're cognitive or they're technique. These terms, we only invented these terms, a few hundred years ago, maybe at the earliest, and cognitive probably is only about 20 years old. On the other hand, since the term transform seems itself abstract, you might say, and I've used this term for the upper Paleolithic cave art, spiritual transformation processes. But you could also call them cognitive or symbolic transformation models. It really doesn't matter what the term is. Any term is going to be loosely speaking. What's important is to attempt to describe them, and I've been working at this for at least 20 years now, and I have not published very much. It's not easy to gain precision to try and discover and delineate these transforms. So the theory I'm presenting today has not been proposed until today. So listen up and take good notes on it. So here we go. We're going back in time. We're going way back. We're going to descend deeper and deeper into the deep strata of the psyche. We descend, and I'm afraid I use the word psyche. I don't know what this group thinks about that, but I'm also a practicing psychotherapist. So I went back to school and got an MA in depth psychology in a Jungian tradition. And I know I've read articles skeptic of psychology and psychotherapy, but we can talk about that. So we're going below the Bronze Age, ancient Egypt, Greece, Sumer, Babylon. When I took Art 101 in college, that's what the first images came up for that. We're going way below that. We're going below Buddhism, the Vedas, Judaism, Islam, Taoism. We're going way, they're all agricultural. All the religions are agricultural religions. And so we're going below that. We're going to go below the Neolithic, to quote New Stone Age, the Neolithic, which is especially a matrilineal horticultural societies and its very complex iconographic systems, sometimes said to be of the goddesses. And this is this is brilliantly decoded by the archaeologist and linguist Maria Gambutas, Civilizations of the Goddess and Language of the Goddess, some of her books, and she was one of my mentors. So we're going to dig down through that level. Actually, it was Maria who told me, why don't you go deeper than the Neolithic? I said, okay. I like this Upper Paleolithic. When I first hit the Upper Paleolithic, I couldn't fathom it. And it took a long time just to get a feel for it. So, but we're going to, that's the recent rock art like Lascaux and all that. So we're going to go way below that. We're going to go down through the Middle Paleolithic. We're going to go down through the Acheulean Early Paleolithic, Homo erectus, and then we come to the Oldowan. And we're going to go right back to the beginning of the evolution of art and symbol. And even back to the Australopithecines, like Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. So we're back there. And here's the earliest artwork we know of. This is a found object, as artists like to call them. So we have a found object. This is from Makapansgat, South Africa. It's between 2 and 3 million years ago. And by all evidence, it was found by an Australopithecine and from a nearby stream bed, taken back to its cave. His or her cave. And it was recognized and appreciated because it has one or more faces on it. It was discovered by Raymond Dart, and he identified at least 3 faces, which he said might be a juvenile or infant, an adult, and an oldster. The features of the stone are completely natural. Colleague Robert Bednarik from Rock Art Research in Australia, a geologist, looked at it and he said all the features are natural. So a critic might say, well, that Australopithecine was looking at clouds, which is what I frequently hear from when my papers are rejected or my presentations. Oh, you're looking at clouds. But that's a whole other subject on neuroscience, and a great study came out about 3 weeks ago on it, which pretty much demolished a whole group of cognitive theorists on, like Guthrie, on the origins of art. Or it's a perceptual ambiguity. That's another term. I think Guthrie might have invented that one. But that might be so. I have nothing wrong with any of it, looking at clouds or perceptual ambiguity. But as any artist knows, art's much more than that. So let's move forward in time about 500,000 years. And we're in the African Rift Valley, scavenger and hunting niche of the earliest hominids in our line, Homo habilis and Homo rudolfensis. We're in the period of the Oldowan, or pebble tool culture. Think of Olduvai Gorge in Kenya, excavated by Lewis and Mary Leakey. This is also a niche of the Australopithecines. Let's first consider chimpanzees, a stand-in for our common ancestor. You may be familiar with studies showing that chimpanzees in the wild evidence a variety of types of tool using. Chimpanzees use stone tools to break open nuts, tubers, and other hard-shelled edibles, and perhaps it's perhaps a case of convergent evolution. Maybe they learned it from the early hominids. We have no way of knowing. But most paleoanthropologists would assume, and are assuming for now, that our common ancestor used stone tools in a similar manner. I just got these images off the internet, and I had to leave the digital watermark on this one. And it's true that Darwin was a Cambridge graduate, but I don't know what he really thought about science at Oxford. So here's chimpanzee in Liberia, nut cracking palm nuts with hammerstone and a stone anvil. Another image. Not only do chimpanzee males not have a monopoly on stone use. Here we see, well, it's a male, and this is a second image from the one I just showed you. So here the family is gathered around, watching the operation to get at, to crack these nuts and get something that will be quite tasty. So not only do chimpanzee males not have a monopoly on stone tool use, here as a team, the Bosches, reported from Thai forest many years ago, females, when they studied over time the use of the stone tools to crack nuts and so forth, their view was that the females were much more adept, more frequently engaged in stone tool use, and were involved in teaching the technique to offspring. And males were so hyper around stones that they were always thinking about picking them up and throwing them at things, and very rarely could get enough concentration to actually use the stones to hammer the nuts and get food from them. And that's so much for the macho origins of technology, which is in the literature and was in those images in that cartoon, bang, bang, bang. But we have no idea actually what the gender relationships were for our common ancestor around this tool making. But the main thing I want to point out is the cognitive metaphoric constellation, a symbolic constellation of hammerstone, anvil, stone, sometimes they use a tree root, and the target, the edible. This is the prior constellation for the emergence of Oldowan tool making. Tool making, that is, using tools to make tools, which is the Oldowan leap of ingenuity. First Oldowan flaking technique was probably bipolar flaking by what's called split cobble technique, as illustrated on the left. There's the hammerstone, the anvil. So you can see the translation between from the chimpanzee to the earliest ancestor of and the Homo habilis and our lineage. And in between, instead of a nut, has been placed a stone to flake. At some point, after some years, the hominin learned to put the stone in their hand and flake in their hand. So if you ask any archaeologist who's a flint napper to show you Oldowan napping, he'll always pick it up in his hand and flake it like this. But evolution didn't start that way, it looks like, but it would have started with this bipolar flaking image on the left here. Either way, the goal was to generate a sharp flake, a tool that could be used for cutting something, but that's only part of it. On the one hand, the sharp flakes could be used as cutting tools, and the core could be discarded. On the other hand, conversely, once a flake is removed, that might leave an edge on the core, and the core could be used as a percussive tool for pounding or chopping. This is the first stone tool technology, and some label it evolutionary mode 1, pebble tool industry. This is the new constellation: hammerstone, core, flake, and anvil stone, that we can see is mapped upon the prior stone technology of our Australopithecine, our common ancestor. Thinking of it in the reverse or in the forward direction, this is the first transform, the first meme. Every element is a component of a whole metaphorical, symbolic system or transformation. So consider each element. The hammerstones, these are from Olduvai Gorge, 1.5 million years ago. Sometimes hammerstones have been found the size of basketballs, so they can take on a symbolic significance. But you won't find this in any archaeologist. They will not tell you anything is symbolic back here. Here's 2 anvils pitted by use. And you can imagine a nut or a stone placed on the anvil stone, and then it's pounded, creates this abrasion. And the top one is very deep. And so it's not a byproduct from intentional everyday use. It's been pounded deeper and deeper and deeper, and constitutes a cupule, what we call in rock art a cupule, which is the earliest intentional rock art symbol, a rock art action, gesture. These are the tools you get out of them. These are flakes. Sometimes the flakes are trimmed further. These are Mary Leakey's illustrations. This is Kubi-Fora. This is the field school at work. And here you can see at this site the black stone in the middle. That's the core of an Oldowan tool that's on the surface there. It was actually dug up at that particular site. And when I was there, I said to the staff at the field school, I'm looking for proto-art. Everyone was like dumbfounded. And but then later, one of the staff people took me aside and said, there's a very curious thing I'm going to show you. And in the little museum there, which we don't understand. I said, okay, let's see that. So these are the stones. I photographed them at the museum in Nairobi. With gratitude to the museum director for letting me into these stones, which are all under lock and key. And these are all pebble cores. And the one on the upper right is the one that is the interesting one. This is a cast of it. Side view, slightly different color. This is the object I have written about on an article on the website in the journal Continuum. Posted on the site. I wrote on this in 1992, this stone, which needs to be more famous. Someone struck off 4 flakes sequentially around it, 2 on one side and 2 on the other, which is a standard flaking technique for these cores. And normally it would make a single edge, but there's a flaw in the stone, and out popped a diamond, a rhomboid shape. And according to the staff, this was recognized by the maker of that stone, and that tool, that core, was recognized and manuported, carried from the place where it was flaked to their habitation site. So it's artificial, totally unplanned. And at the same time, this beautiful rhomboid emerges from the center of it. The crack in the center is just from the casting. So when I saw this, it gave me a chill, and I thought, this rhomboid symbol is in the entire all prehistory, in all art, and it's everywhere. It's in religion and it's in science, and so this rhomboid is important. And then of course people say, oh, you only have one of those, and it was an accident. So here from a site in the Netherlands, a later site, so this is from the mid-Acheulean period. Here they're just making rhomboids in all different sizes, and from about this big up to about this big. And there are great illustrations of these all stacked up one on the other, so you see that they're working with the same template and so forth. And any article on the Acheulean period say they do not have a mental template. This is I'm in a discussion online with somebody now about this. They didn't have a mental template back there 1 million years ago, or these are like 500,000 years ago. I said, well, maybe not, but they certainly are able to make art. Here's that Kubi-Fora rhomboid again. This is, to me, is the first metaphor. So this first meme is the first metaphor. And I'm not saying the stone is the metaphor. I'm saying it's a manifestation, an expression of the meme structure, the first metaphor. So this is not a mental template held in the mind intentionally to make an artifact. It's a preconscious, generative, conceptual transform. And it involves the doubled constellations of Australopithecine nutcracking on the one hand, and Oldowan stone tool making on the other. So the whole thing is the meme. It's that movement forward, that leap. On the left in the diagram, the pounding tool technology of Australopithecine, or our common ancestor. The gray arrow represents the leap. A leap has occurred. The word metaphor means, or the word diaphor, there's a better term for it, a diaphor. It means to move across from one thing to the next. And so a leap has occurred. So it's not like you read in archaeology, it's not like a pebble is substituted for a nut. That's trivial. And someone goes bang, bang. That's not it. It's not so simple. The nut meat is to the shell as a core is to a flake. That's an analogy. That's a simile. Also, already there's an analogy or simile. What Aristotle called a metaphor by analogy. But it's more complex even than this, because it cuts both ways, so to speak. A core is fractured to make a flake, a cutting tool. Or a core might be, conversely, a core is maybe a pounding or breaking tool, and the flake is discarded as useless. There's a conversion or translation back and forth between what's the core and what's the cutting tool, because it's not simple. Either one could be the other. It's not a simple literal or conventional metaphor. It's further along than a simile. And it's even worse for rational thinking. If we read the technology as mapping back onto or interresonating with this older stone nutcracking technology, the total complex is really what in neuroscience they call a creative metaphor, not a literal one. It's a transformation. This is the first metaphor. And what it means is the core seed essence that feeds us. The core is just what the archaeologists say it is. It's a core. But now it's on a metaphorical level. And they don't realize that they're speaking metaphorically when they use their language in archaeology. The first metaphor expresses the core of everything, the bountiful source, the source of all utility and usefulness, and all ultimate meaning. What we have is precisely what in technical literary parlance is called a radical or anti-metaphor, or in Niels Bohr's terms, contraria sunt complementa. And this is the primary characteristic of symbols. So there's that core again, flaked sequentially and alternately around, four-sided, yielding the diamond, which itself is two alternate pairs of flake removals. This is an expression of the first metaphor, and it points to the originary or constructed metaphor of conceptual art. So I could wax very poetic about this and talk about that this stone represents an interpersonal, interactive copoesis of human creativity and well-being within and without. It also represents animacy, and we can talk about this because this is a volatile term in cognitive neuroscience and in cognitive evolution theory. It is alive, it's animate. The animate in spirit inhabits the body. This is a leaping energy, an elan vital, what philosopher Nietzsche called spirit. When in Zarathustra, when Nietzsche talks about the word spirit and defines it, he even says it's between the hammer and the anvil. So in our psyches, in the deep strata of our psyches, we are 2.5 million years old. So, let's see, I'm pretty much near the end here. I got back? Very quickly, I just want to show you that there's more art going on than just what I'm showing you. This is Mary Leakey's discovery 1.75 million years ago. This anvil stone has 6 cupules, indentations put into it. Then it's grooved around the top, and as she said, looks like a baboon head. So If you accept this, we have to be looking for more examples, but most archaeologists have their blindfolds on. Then we have figurative or representational art from almost 2 million years ago. You may not accept this baboon head because only one of them. So here again, this is from a site in Germany that's 400,000 to 500,000 years old, where the amateur collector, again not recognized by the establishment, the amateur collector has all kinds of primate heads that she's found among thousands of other figurative arts. And so this is from Pampau, right outside of Germany, from a quarry site. So baboon heads, and back to the meme, and that's where we are. Okay.
So you mentioned the 2 million years, the religion, language, art, other symbolic forms of representation, that sort of thing. And you're kind of presenting a new paradigm, because the old paradigm is the idea that we had this cultural explosion about 40,000 years ago. And I'm a member of that school, so this will be kind of interesting because I do see a very drastic, significant change in symbolic representation between about 40 to 70,000 years ago. And in the talk that I'm going to give today, I'll show some representation of how the transitions change rather drastically. The first question I have basically is the idea that you talked about pebbles, and you talked about things of that sort, and the various kind of rhomboid figures and that sort of thing. Basically, why do we see kind of the same type of basic representation for such a long period of time, where you have the kind of very old archaic Venuses, or what you call the ape heads, the pebbles and that sort of thing? Why back then aren't we seeing much more sophisticated forms of art that we tend to see in the 40 to 70,000 year period?
Took a long time to get here. Why don't we see more sophisticated art?
Back in, like, because you're talking, and I'm kind of with you, my sympathies are with you. I do think there were a number of factors that were going on in our ancestors, and they were doing various types of activities, but what I'm going to argue later this aft is there had to be a sufficient set of conditions, things like language and consciousness, in order to be able to manipulate materials in a more sophisticated way. So then, based on your argumentation, the new paradigm, why then wouldn't we, during the Aldebaran or Acheulean periods, why wouldn't we see more sophisticated things? Why aren't we seeing cave art dated 2 million years ago that are as sophisticated as what we see in Altamira just a few thousand years ago?
There's a bunch of questions in there. One is on rock art. Unless rock art is protected, like at extremely unusual, rare places, like the limestone caves of France, where the layer of calcite comes down and covers the art and preserves it. Rock art in an open shelter, say, frequently doesn't last more than at best a few hundred years. So Robert Bednarik, who's the editor of Rock Art Research in Australia, which is one of the major rock art journals in the world, has many articles that you can get online on taphonomy, which basically translates as we can't judge on the basis of rock art alone. We cannot we can't make much judgment about what was happening a long time ago, because all that art is lost. So we don't really know when people were doing paintings on rock walls until a certain period of time where it's not destroyed, basically. So it's not eroded off the walls or destroyed by the sunlight and weather and so forth. So,
but you're not saying we're going to find cave art 2 million years ago had it not been for erosion? Would you say 2 million years ago we would have had a sophisticated drawing?
as I indicate with the memes and the models, we're in a steady evolutionary process.
Mm-hmm.
First, I want to deal with that rock art question. So, yeah, so this is more a cognitive question. So, I mean, I have talked about just a tiny bit of what the available rock art research is. In the older one, there is not. What I've shown you is pretty much what's available in the archaeological record. As soon as we move into the Middle Acheulean, is another lecture I would give, because there's a whole symbolic system in there, but it would take a long time to explain. When we get to the later Acheulean, at 500 to 600,000 years ago, down to say 150,000 years ago, if you want to have a creative explosion, that's where it is. So it's happening with Homo erectus. That's the creative explosion. And I have slides even that I brought with me. So on this time period, we have hundreds, there are probably tens of millions of figurative representational sculptures. I wouldn't expect them necessarily to go to wall painting, you know, and have Renaissance two-dimensional perspective, but it seems to me we're going to find the earliest art in sculpture stone, because people are working stone. So the thing you're most likely to find first, if the archaeologists are looking for it, is stone sculpture. And we do have in some of the books, like Bond's and Vertute's book on Journey to the Ice Age, there's, in the second edition, he's already expanded a little back into that time period. So you can see from Barakat Ram in Israel at the female figurine from there, which is you can find that on the Google image it.
I have it in my talk. So
okay, so the Barakat Ram figurine, it's generally said, oh, it's about 250,000 years ago. But that's the capping layer.
Yeah, it could be 800,000.
It could be 800. Yeah. It's two-thirds of the way down that strata, and if it's evenly deposited, then it's in that, you know, it's at least like probably 400,000 years. Mm-hmm. So, in this time period, from this site in Pampao, this amateur collector, who was a fossil collector first, and then said, well, what are these sculptures doing here among these fossils she was collecting? So she has thousands of these sculptures. And there's a British archaeologist who's quite published, and he's very good at some Upper Paleolithic and Mesolithic Pettit. So when Pettit, he says, we have a quote from him. He said, say 20 years ago, there's no art back here because no one's shown us any. Okay, or maybe there's just one or two pieces like Barakat Ram. Okay, so we find thousands. So now the quote of the day from the establishment is, there are so many sculptures, we archaeologists would have to spend our entire lifetimes just to look at them all. So it's like, you know, give us a break, you know. So there's an unbelievable amount of art out there if the archaeologists would just look at it. And you can show an archaeologist a flaked stone. Now, if you show it to a lead archaeologist on any team, they'll say, they'll deny it. And I've had this experience at sites. I'll say, well, these could be sculptures. I've had an archaeologist brush them off the examination table onto the ground. I had another sculpture. I said to the lead archaeologist, this looks like a triangular figurine. I have an image with me of it, from the Middle Paleolithic at Harkarkom, Israel, which is covered with 500 shelters. You can see the shelters in the flint, shelter floors. This was out of Africa, Middle Paleolithic. So you have a figurine. It's triangular. It's fairly abstract. It was in the center of a hut floor. So I say, this looks artificially made, and it's possible it's an intentional abstract geometric sculpture. No, we don't have any of these at this time. So I take it to the flint expert, who the lead archaeologist has to rely on, person who flakes stone and knows. Well, it is all artificially flaked. Well, it's obviously not a tool of any kind in any classification. What is it then? So it's not a random core left over from flaking. So this is a typical response in the field of archaeology today.
That leads to my next point, and that is, couldn't that have been just luck, an accident, a byproduct? It had no intentionality whatsoever. And therein lies, I think, the danger with archaeology in general, which has been my experience, because we don't have a time machine. We have to be careful that we don't get into these just so stories, that we just start making stuff up and say, oh, this had to be X, this had to be Y, because then we're just spinning stories. Right. And where does the evidence lead us, and where do we have to say, you know, we really can't say, and we have to just be better safe than sorry, be cautious. And
I would, you know, I have a little picture that I had on this stand up there, because I said, what should be my general approach to all of this today? So it's because I'm a Buddhist practitioner. This is Maitreya Buddha, the Buddha of the future, carved in around the 11th century in Korea. So the statue of the Maitreya Buddha he's just pondering. So I'm just asking for pondering, you know, not the closed minds that I run into so often. To have our minds open and entertain the possibility that X may be a sculpture. Well, then it's a scientific question. Is it or is it not? And to what degree it is. Like I showed, something can be artificial and sculpted. So like if you take Zuni fetishes, which I'm a big fan of and was in Arizona, in the Zuni, there's a wonderful quote, and there's a little book you can get at most bookstores in Arizona on the Zuni fetishes by Frank Cushing, who was the anthropologist in the 19th century on the Zuni reservation, who was inducted into one of the secret societies so that he could learn really what the culture was about. And the book on fetishes, he has a quote in there from one of the informants. Well, what's the best fetish? What's the most important kind of a fetish? Well, you can have poorly made fetishes. So sure, there are lots of sculptures which you're not quite sure what it's to represent. What kind of animal is this? Well, I'm not sure what that is. You can say that we give that fetish a D. Well, we move up to maybe there's a C sculpture. Well, that's not bad. I see that it's some kind of a proboscis. Could be a mammoth, could be an elephant. You're not quite sure. So then you move up to a real masterpiece. And I've got slides of these from at least a couple 100,000 years ago. It's I'd have to show them to you and say, do you not see this particular species of animal in this sculpture? So then you move, then the informant says, but the best sculpture of all, and he shows him one, he says, and it is all natural, and it was made by the Great Spirit. That has the most power. So science needs to develop a grading system, and I've tried to work on this, but even the amateur collectors aren't interested in looking at it. So you can, so there are degrees of workmanship.
Yeah, I agree that science needs to keep an open mind. That's certainly a great idea, not to be overly dogmatic and that sort of thing. I have no problem with that. My concern is always in just being careful. Let's be cautious first here as to what we can really get from the evidence. What can we get from the details? That sort of thing. Based on the time, does anybody in the audience, does anybody have a question they'd like to offer? Paul?
Well, I don't pretend to be an expert in this field, but the out of Africa theory is so widely held. What is the degree of evidence?
Now you say a new paradigm
Paul,
is emerging.
There's a mic.
Perhaps a new paradigm is emerging, but we would need more evidence than what you've presented thus far.
Oh yeah,
scattering.
Like I said, I have a semester's worth of evidence, but I can only, do a bit of it. But it's not just me. I'm not the only one working on this. Say Robert Bednarek, who is editor of rock art research in Australia. So he has published, like in Current Anthropology and some of the major journals, He's actually published over 1,000 articles. So if you want publications, Robert Bednarik has the publications. He's in the same position on getting rid of the old paradigm is no longer functional.
So are you a multi-regionalist? Do you believe sapiens speciated outside of Africa, or they speciated in Africa and then moved out?
I think our database is very minimal, basically. But to answer some of these questions, what I try to present is there are 3 waves out of Africa. This is not totally my own theory. This has been published also in journals.
Okay. Sapiens, so 3 waves, or Erectus heidelbergensis?
Yeah, let's call it habilis. I think they usually say rudolfensis because he's taller.
Okay.
He could go fast. He could walk faster or something. So there's that wave because either you accept it's all multi-regional, or you accept some people accept it's all migration out of Africa, and I say it's, well, when people put up that kind of a polarity, it's usually, truth is usually both of those things.
But I can accept that one species left Africa 1.5 million years ago and then speciated in Asia somewhere.
Right.
Just all the evidence tends to show that sapiens speciated in Africa and then moved out between 60 and 100,000 years ago. Like, that seems to be the consensus with anthropologists now. So that we were pretty much complete. We were pretty much complete, sapiens. By 200,000 years ago, we had speciated, and we didn't move out of Africa till about between 60 and 100,000 years ago. So would you still maintain that's the central idea, the accepted?
If we're just looking at
sapiens,
at the hominid species, that sapiens, based on the data we have, which is very limited, because we'd have most rest of the world, we don't have a lot of data.
Right.
So, yes, it looks like Homo sapiens left either Africa or Southwest Asia, because if you look at the Y-DNA, it's coming out of Southwest Asia.
Okay.
So there's a movement back into Africa.
Or there could have been, yes.
Because in the Sahara, if you look up Wikipedia, the Sahara pump model, which I only learned about a few months ago, that's it, because the species are moving back and forth between Africa and Southwest Asia in the interglacials. So, we're at 125,000.
But we wouldn't say they all came from Scarborough, right? Like, we're still back in Africa, right?
For Homo sapiens, probably.
Okay.
Because, and this I had mapped out, and you can get this on my website. All the databases. There's a journal called Mother Tongue, which is the ASLIP, the American Society for Language and Prehistory. It's located, basically, it's Harvard and BU. So they said to me, well, could you give us a review of archaeology, because we think people left earlier than everyone else is saying. Like, okay, so I because I'm so obsessive about facts, I reviewed about 600, I think it's 600 archaeological sites between Africa and China, and I mapped all those out by time, by the latest chronological stuff I could get on them. So that's mapped. So you see that at each stage of evolution, sometimes there's a gradient you can follow. It looks like things moved out of Africa. A few 100,000 years before that, where you have another evolutionary stage, say, there's no gradient. So, well, maybe the archaeological research is not good enough to tell us if there's a gradient or not. But based on the existing archaeological data we have today, there is multi-regional evolution occurring, and there are apparent gradients of movements out of Africa. So once, say, Middle Acheulean moves out of Africa, Homo erectus, all over the world, evolution is going on continuously. And then, like, the only thing I could detect were these 3 waves are the 3 archaeological gradients that suggest there's movement.
Okay.
For any other of those time periods I list, of which there's like 12 or 15 of them, there's no gradients. So those appear to be multi-regional evolutions.
Okay. Well, in the interest of science, in the interest of fairness, I certainly welcome your views, as much as they deviate from my own and some of the other people in the field. But thank you very much, James, for a very interesting talk.
Thank you. Thank you.
Center for Inquiry Canada's premier venue for secular humanists, atheists, skeptics, and free thinkers.
This event was hosted by the Centre for Inquiry Canada, an educational charity promoting science, reason, secularism, and free inquiry. CFI Canada coordinates branches and campus groups across the country, runs a public education series, provides secular community services, incorporates cutting-edge multimedia such as blogs, podcasts, and YouTube, and is a regular voice in the press presenting a secular humanist, atheist, and skeptical perspective. Visit us at www.cficanada.ca and contact us at info@cficanada.ca.